We come to the last Sunday in June, and I'll admit, I woke up this morning thinking it was Communion Sunday. It was the first Sunday of July, which is the third time I've made that mistake this week. So I got up early, and I got my robe and everything ready, and I got to Palo Pinto, and I was really confused because no one had gotten communion ready yet. And I was running around the kitchen like, where's the chalice? Where are the plates? Where's the bread? And one of the gentlemen's like, well, Pastor, it's June 30th. Communion's next week. But we come to the last Sunday of June. And we're almost to that magical halfway point. If you have children or grandchildren, or you are yourself a child in school, where July 4th is the halfway point of summer vacation. You're now sliding down towards the start of school. I know a few teachers here I'm breaking their heart, I understand. But you're coming to the halfway point of going back to school, and I always remember growing up that it was a great time of celebration because I loved the 4th of July. I loved the fireworks and all the excitement. And I'd wake up on the 5th of July and it felt like that dark cloud was hanging over me. That school was coming again and coming again soon. And it's probably because of that feeling of having to go back to school, although I don't get a summer vacation anymore, that this week, to conclude our series on God in film, as we look at ideas of faith in film, that I reached back and I picked one of my childhood films. When I was growing up, our parents took us to go see The Lion King in theaters. And I know I say that, and a majority of you now think you're old. But I remember that very vividly in my childhood. We went and we saw The Lion King in theaters. And it was one of the first animated movies that I really connected with. You know, we'd seen all sorts of other animated movies growing up. But that was the first one where I came out of the theater thinking, wow, I really enjoyed that movie. Granted, I was in elementary school, so I was like, wow, I really liked that movie. And if you remember the whole plot line, it revolves around Simba as the protagonist. And he's the prince of this kingdom of Pride Rock, this big rock. There's an Elton John song or two thrown in there in the mix. And you get Simba, and he is the stereotypical stuck-up heir to the throne. He has all of the physical attributes of someone who's going to be king. He's entitled. He feels privileged. He feels like he owns everything. And through the course of the movie, we realize one thing. Up into the middle of the movie, we realize that he's not quite a king yet. He's not quite there yet. Oh, he might be heir to the throne, and then when his dad passes away, he might technically be the legitimate king, but he's not there yet. He might have all of the outward signs and markings of being the king because of who his parents were, because of who his family is. But in here, inside, he's not a king yet. Not until the middle of the movie when he has an encounter with one of his dad's trusted advisors, and he points out his own insecurities. Points out his own failures. And something changes on the inside. Something's different in his own heart. And there's a pivot in that movie at that point where Simba, this character, he changes completely. He changes from this insecure, spoiled, entitled person to someone that's a little more honorable, a little more worthy, a little bit better. Now, was it all of the outward signs that caused this transformation? Was it the fact that he was the heir to the throne? Was it the fact that he had this or that growing up? No, it wasn't any of those things. Something inside had to change first. Something had to be different in his heart for him to really understand who he was and what he needed to do. And I think that's what Paul is talking about today. See, we approach the text today kind of with a similar question. It's a question that's been kicked around the church since the very beginning. What is more important, the physical attributes, the physical expressions of our faith, or what happens on the inside, what happens in our heart? What's more important? We see Paul making a very clear argument today that it's the second part. What happens on the inside is the most important. Originally, this question came out of Paul and his outreach to the Gentile, the people who weren't Jews, immediately following Christ's death, resurrection, and ascension. He went out and he began to spread the faith among people who weren't Jewish. And so you had this influx of people into the church who culturally were not like the Jewish people the church was originally made up of. And we see specifically today an argument about circumcision. You see all these new people coming in, and they said, there's certain Jewish laws we don't have to follow to be part of this group. And the Jewish folks, they weren't happy about that. And so they said very clearly, you have to follow every single rule of the law, the way it is written, quite literally. And so it's no wonder that we get to today's passage, and this is the sticking point for a lot of them. But it's really a bigger argument than that. Because at its core, it's an argument about what our faith is. Is our faith just an outward expression? Something we do? Or is our faith an inward grace? Something that's transformed inside of us? Paul makes the argument that our faith begins on the inside, a movement of God's own Spirit. As he notes that real circumcision, real following of the law is not just a physical expression, but it's a matter of the heart. Simply something in some way changes in us on the inside. And we're different. And that something is God's Spirit awakening us to faith. And I think this is an idea the church has to rediscover as we go into this new century when the culture around us changes so very quickly. I mean, think about it for a minute. Think about it. You literally could be anywhere else but here this morning. And as I say that, I know some of you start thinking about the million things on your to-do list that you could get done. If you had an hour or 2 hours back on Sunday morning, that's like a load and a half of laundry. We could count that. That's all of the dishes in the kitchen sink if I do them. Or 2 or 3 loads of dishes if my wife does them. You could mow your yard. Well, it's still somewhat cool out. Think about the fact that you could go to Walmart and you get all your shopping done before everyone else gets there. And you wouldn't have to wait for 20 minutes in the checkout line. See, to a world outside of our faith, if they don't see that inward transformation, if they don't understand and empathize with what's different on the inside, our physical actions as a church look really, really strange. So you're telling me that you all come here and you give up an hour every Sunday morning, or some of you every other Sunday morning. Why? It's like the best time in the week. This is the one day you have to sleep in, that you don't have to run off to the baseball fields or the soccer fields or here or there. You could be at home in bed or at home drinking coffee or whatever your morning drink of choice is. You could be at home in your PJs still, and yet you're here. And then it doesn't stop there, because earlier in the service we passed these plates around. And you know what you did? Is you put money in the plates. In a culture, in a day, in an age where everything is more and more and more expensive, you willingly gave up your resources. In a public setting. When you could have bought lunch. Or you could have bought something different, something new, driven a better car, got a fancier house to live in. Instead, you sacrificed your resources. And then I think the weirdest one of all, we gather together, we give of ourselves, and then we sit and we stand and we sit and we stand as directed, but the whole mix of all that, we're singing together as a group. In case you haven't noticed, in the world today, life outside of the church isn't just one big musical where everyone's singing and dancing. The idea of communal singing has kind of gone by the wayside. It doesn't really exist anymore in any other place than concerts and the church. And so I want you to picture this. I want you to understand this from the outside looking in. When people look at us, when they look at us and just the physical expressions of our faith, the worship, the time we give, the resources we give, we all look strange to the world around us. And in fact, we are, because what gives this worth, what gives all of these strange actions and meaning and depth and power is the transformation of our own hearts. It moved in us and brought us to faith. It's what makes giving up an hour on Sunday morning seem worthwhile. It's what gives value and depth to the offering plate. It's what enlivens and adds vitality to the songs that we sing. It's what enables us to understand that this whole cascade of strange actions we engage with on Sunday morning is something more than the physical representation of our faith. It is something deeper to join together and sing. It's something more powerful. And that power, that depth, that life comes from what's happened in here. Comes from the transformation of our own heart. That's what Paul's talking about. Paul is writing to the church not once but twice. I think it's important to realize he didn't write this once and it was a settled issue. But this has been a continual issue over and over and over and over again in the history of the church. He writes again in Colossians, and he writes to the church there, and he tells them, you were also circumcised by Christ. This wasn't performed by human hands. The whole body was removed through this circumcision by Christ. Not just meeting the physical letter of the law, but you're meeting some deeper spiritual reality, something more than the physical manifestation of the law. It reminds me of a friend. We're both pastors now in the conference, but before that we were both youth directors, and he'd tell me this story. He was at a medium-sized church, and they'd done, for the first time, a mentoring setup for confirmation, where they pair a sixth grader with an adult, and they form a relationship over a series of months. And through that relationship, the adult gains some vital insight on youth and faith, and the sixth grader develops a firm foundation of faith in a relational atmosphere. A really great model. And he tells a story about when he was mentoring this sixth grade girl. He'd known her forever. And he's mentoring this girl, and they come to this point in confirmation where you talk about your own salvation, what it is to have a saving faith in Jesus Christ. And he stops and he asks her, how do you know that you're saved? Putting it in a really Texan-y Baptist way. How do you know that you're saved? And this little girl, and I shouldn't say little girl because she's sixth grade, so this preteen answers him very quickly, without missing a beat, and says, I know I am saved because I've asked Jesus into my heart 6 times. And I'm going to do it again on Confirmation Sunday. It reminded me a lot of one of the youth I had at a church in Kentucky, and we watched very proudly, her parents and I, as she came forward during confirmation, and she was baptized at one of our satellite churches. And we baptized her as a confirmation baptism. We did a few of those last year. And it was a powerful, moving experience. Well, she went on to college several years later and linked up with the student ministry on campus. It was a non-denominational student ministry. And she felt so moved that she was baptized again. But it didn't stop there. She got married, and her husband, they did kind of the stereotypical thing. They grew up, they got married, they had some kids, they went to a different church in a different town, and they got baptized again. Each time celebrating it very, very publicly on Facebook. And it makes you wonder, what's doing the saving? Is it the physical act of being dunked or sprinkled with the water? Is it like some of our brothers and sisters at other churches believe, the physical act of coming on down to the altar call? What is it that does the work of salvation? What is it that sets our lives and our hearts aside and makes us holy before God and one another? What warms our hearts and stirs our life to live faithfully? It's not just the simple physical action or the amount of water or walking down and kneeling at the altar, all great and valid expressions of a faithful heart. But that's just the point. They are the expressions of a faithful heart. And for too long, the church has put the cart in front of the horse, thinking the actions are what's important. And we've all heard it before, pastors most of all. You go into a church and they say it in a very subtle but firm way. Oh, Pastor, we've always done it that way. Paul, we've always practiced the law that way. But it's not about that. It's about God's Spirit moving in us anew. Moving in us to stir us to a deeper level of faith than just physically going through the motions. It's about God's Spirit stirring us to something more than just showing up for an hour on Sunday morning. More than just putting a few dollars in the offering plate, more than singing a few hymns together, more, yes, even more than sitting and standing and sitting and standing and sitting and standing at the appropriate times. Our faith is about God stirring in our heart, and then the actions of the church. Everything from what we do here, to when we share a meal in the fellowship hall, to what we do during the week in the office, every aspect of the life of the church flows out of the work of sanctification that God's Spirit is working in our own hearts. It's kind of like that lion cub that we started with. You're not really the king until you're the king in your own heart. We're not really a people made holy by God's Spirit until our own hearts have been warmed by God's movements in our life. We're not really worshiping until our hearts are aflame with the passion of God. We're not giving until we've experienced the generosity of a living God. We're not really singing until we've heard God's song in our own heart, in our own soul. I want to invite you this week